The night over the Persian Gulf looked unusually calm. Above the dark waters, nothing appeared out of place. Civilian vessels followed routine shipping routes, while surveillance aircraft continued distant patrol patterns under the cover of darkness. Along the coastline, military radar stations rotated endlessly, scanning the horizon and processing thousands of signals moving across one of the most heavily monitored regions in the world. Inside command centers, operators sat in front of glowing displays as streams of data flowed continuously through layered defense networks. Everything seemed normal. No alarms, no emergency signals, no signs of immediate danger. To every observer watching from the outside, the region appeared trapped in another routine military night where systems watched, aircraft patrolled, and nothing happened. But beneath that illusion of stability, something had already begun. Far away from the attention of regional command structures, a carefully planned operation was moving into its final stage. Unlike modern strike packages designed around stealth platforms and overwhelming firepower, this operation depended on a completely different idea. It would not challenge advanced defense systems directly. Instead, it would exploit their blind spots. Because despite decades of technological advancement, even the most sophisticated military systems still possessed limitations. Radar coverage was never absolute. Detection networks were never perfect. And sometimes the most dangerous threats were not the fastest or most advanced ones. Sometimes danger came from the things people stopped expecting. Amid increasing political pressure and rising military tensions throughout the region, Iran had reached a dangerous conclusion. Direct confrontation against a technologically superior opponent carried enormous risks. Conventional approaches would almost certainly fail. A large-scale assault would immediately trigger overwhelming response mechanisms. So instead of matching modern power with modern power, a different strategy emerged. An older aircraft would be used. An aircraft many believed no longer belonged on a future battlefield. The F-5E platform had existed for decades. Born during another era of warfare, it had survived through upgrades, modifications, and adaptation programs. Compared with fifth-generation aircraft, it looked outdated and almost insignificant. Its shape lacked stealth characteristics. Its systems belonged to an earlier generation, but appearances could become misleading, because the aircraft possessed one unexpected advantage. It was small. Its profile remained relatively difficult to isolate under certain environmental conditions. Combined with low-altitude operations and terrain masking, it could create temporary tracking problems even inside modern surveillance networks. And that weakness formed the center of the entire operation. Under darkness, the aircraft departed from southern territory and immediately began descending. Instead of climbing toward open sky, it dropped lower, then lower, and lower still. Within minutes, the fighter reached an altitude so close to the surface that waves beneath it became visible. The aircraft skimmed across the Persian Gulf only meters above sea level. This was not random. It was deliberate. At low altitude, the curvature of the Earth created an important limitation for ground radar systems. Radar waves traveled outward, but eventually the horizon blocked visibility against extremely low objects. Targets flying near the surface could temporarily disappear beneath detection angles. Pilots understood this. Military planners understood this. And tonight, someone intended to exploit it. As the aircraft pushed forward over dark water, the environment itself became another layer of protection. Commercial ships moved through maritime corridors. Tankers crossed established routes. Civilian traffic generated countless returns across surveillance systems. Inside radar displays, the battle space became crowded. Signals overlapped. Wave reflections distorted readings. Surface clutter interfered with tracking quality. And hidden among all of it, one aircraft quietly moved through the darkness. Inside command centers, operators continued observing routine traffic patterns. Hundreds of contacts moved normally. Aircraft crossed designated routes. Maritime signals behaved as expected. Nothing immediately stood out. At first, then subtle irregularities began appearing. Not enough to trigger emergency procedures. Not enough to justify immediate concern. Just small inconsistencies. A signal appearing briefly. A contact fading unexpectedly. An unusual movement pattern. For several moments, systems struggled to classify what they observed. Then new signatures emerged elsewhere. Additional radar contacts suddenly appeared across nearby sectors. At first they seemed unrelated. Then more appeared. And more. Within minutes, command operators noticed an unusual increase in activity. The airspace itself was becoming crowded. Drone signatures appeared along multiple vectors. Electronic signals intensified. Additional contacts spread throughout monitoring zones. Some behaved like legitimate targets. Others moved unpredictably. Several appeared only briefly before disappearing. Confusion slowly entered the network. The problem was not volume. The problem was certainty. Because military systems depended heavily upon classification. Detecting something represented only the first step. Understanding what it was mattered far more. And suddenly that understanding began collapsing. Operators watched as contacts multiplied. Radar returns overlapped. Electronic signatures increased. Information flooded monitoring systems. Some tracks looked genuine. Others resembled interference. Determining reality became increasingly difficult. Inside tactical networks, analysts immediately recognized the danger. Someone was saturating the environment. Not through missiles. Not through direct attack. Through information. By creating uncertainty. By forcing systems to divide attention. By making every contact questionable. Meanwhile, hidden beneath the growing storm of confusion, the low-flying aircraft continued moving. Unseen. Undetected. Almost invisible. For several minutes, it moved through narrow surveillance gaps, while environmental conditions continued protecting its approach. Flying just above the sea surface, the aircraft remained buried beneath radar horizon limitations and maritime clutter. The operation had reached its most dangerous stage, because surprise only worked until the first explosion. After that, everything changed. The fighter suddenly altered its behavior. Without warning, it climbed. Rapidly, the aircraft pulled away from sea level and accelerated toward its objective. For the first time during the mission, exposure risk increased dramatically. Higher altitude meant greater visibility. Greater visibility meant detection probability increased. But at this point, concealment no longer mattered, because the aircraft had already reached strike position. Seconds later, weapons separated. Then came the explosions. Violent fireballs erupted across the target area. Shockwaves rolled through the darkness. Fuel infrastructure ignited instantly. Communication systems collapsed. Flames spread across logistical sectors, while emergency alarms activated simultaneously. Massive columns of black smoke climbed into the night sky. Silence disappeared. Confusion replaced it. Within moments, military installations entered emergency response conditions. Warning networks shifted into maximum alert posture. Communication traffic exploded across command channels. Across the region, systems that moments earlier monitored routine activity now reacted to crisis. Because an impossible scenario had just happened. An aging Cold War-era aircraft had penetrated a heavily monitored defense environment and delivered a successful strike. Inside command centers, disbelief quickly transformed into action. Monitoring posture vanished. Response procedures immediately activated. Surveillance aircraft expanded search zones. Combat patrol units received new orders. Tracking systems intensified operations. Every available sensor shifted toward one objective. Find the aircraft. Find it now. But even as regional forces reacted, another problem immediately emerged. The aircraft responsible had already begun disappearing once again. Instead of remaining exposed after the strike, it descended back toward sea level, back toward darkness, back toward clutter, back toward confusion, and somewhere beneath smoke, radar interference, environmental noise, and growing uncertainty. The hunt had just begun. The explosions had ended, but the real battle had only begun. Across the region, the strike transformed the entire operational environment within seconds. Moments earlier, command centers had been monitoring routine activity patterns. Now every screen, every communication channel, and every surveillance system shifted into emergency response posture. Information flooded tactical networks from every direction. Warning indicators expanded across operational displays, while command officers immediately demanded one answer. Where was the aircraft? Because despite the fires, despite the destruction, and despite the shock of the attack itself, the most dangerous reality remained unchanged. The aircraft responsible was still alive, and somewhere beyond the smoke and chaos, it was escaping. Within minutes, airborne surveillance assets expanded coverage sectors across the Persian Gulf. Patrol aircraft already operating in nearby airspace redirected toward possible withdrawal routes, while additional combat elements received immediate interception orders. The entire defensive structure rapidly transformed from passive monitoring into active pursuit. But modern warfare no longer depended on a single radar searching for a target. It depended on networks. Every sensor mattered. Every aircraft mattered. Every observation became part of a larger battlefield picture. High above the region, airborne early warning platforms widened surveillance corridors and increased tracking sensitivity across operational sectors. Nearby ISR assets immediately shifted toward persistent observation roles. Far above the battlefield, reconnaissance systems maintained continuous monitoring over movement patterns, heat signatures, and route projections. Instead of asking where the aircraft was now, systems began asking a different question: where would it go next? Meanwhile, the retreating aircraft had already returned to the same strategy that allowed it to penetrate the defenses in the first place. It dropped lower, then even lower. Returning toward sea level, the aircraft once again disappeared into one of the most difficult tracking environments imaginable. Beneath it stretched endless water. Civilian shipping traffic crossed multiple routes. Tankers moved through commercial lanes. Surface reflections continuously distorted radar behavior. The pilot understood something important. Detection did not guarantee engagement, and as long as confusion remained high enough, survival remained possible. Moving only meters above the sea surface, the aircraft exploited wave-top flight conditions while attempting to merge with environmental clutter. From above, radar returns became unstable. Signals shifted continuously. Reflections from civilian vessels created interference patterns that overlapped with actual aircraft movement. Inside surveillance systems, the picture became increasingly complicated. Contacts appeared. Contacts disappeared. Tracks merged. Signals fluctuated. For several moments, operators struggled to determine which information represented reality and which represented noise. Still, pursuit forces continued closing distance. Data from multiple systems flowed simultaneously into a shared operational network. Information no longer existed inside isolated platforms. Aircraft, surveillance assets, and radar systems exchanged observations continuously. Every movement was compared, every signal analyzed, every pattern examined. Gradually, an increasingly detailed picture began emerging. Then another problem appeared: civilian traffic. The aircraft remained dangerously close to non-combat movement corridors. Commercial activity filled nearby sectors. Maritime routes crossed the battlespace in multiple directions. This created a major complication. Engagement decisions required certainty, because eliminating a target meant nothing if collateral damage followed. Commanders faced an uncomfortable dilemma. Tracking quality remained inconsistent. Target classification remained unstable. And despite increasing confidence, engagement restrictions remained active. The aircraft continued escaping through uncertainty. For a brief moment, it looked like confusion itself had become its shield. Then conditions became even worse. Back at the strike area, fires continued spreading across damaged infrastructure. Fuel depots burned intensely, while smoke expanded through surrounding sectors. Massive heat signatures climbed into the sky and spread through operational airspace. Traditional infrared systems immediately encountered difficulty. Heat surrounded everything. Burning structures generated overlapping thermal sources. Environmental temperatures fluctuated rapidly. Signals merged together. Inside tracking systems, chaos increased. Separating aircraft movement from background interference became increasingly difficult. Normally, this level of environmental disruption could severely degrade pursuit capability. But modern combat systems had evolved beyond traditional limitations. Instead of relying on one sensor type, the response network immediately shifted deeper into integrated sensor fusion. Multiple systems began working together simultaneously. Flight trajectories were compared against thermal signatures. Movement behaviors were analyzed against known operational patterns. Heat sources were filtered. Motion characteristics examined. Instead of searching for visual certainty, the network searched for consistency. Some signals behaved randomly. Others disappeared. Several contacts failed correlation tests. But hidden inside the expanding field of interference, one movement pattern slowly separated itself from everything else. Small, fast, consistent, moving with purpose. The target had emerged. Tracking confidence immediately increased. Information stabilized. For the first time since the attack began, pursuit systems achieved clearer identification. But the retreating aircraft realized something had changed. Someone was following it. Immediately, escape behavior intensified. The aircraft descended even lower over the sea and began aggressive maneuvering patterns. Sudden heading changes disrupted predictive tracking calculations. Flight paths shifted unpredictably, while movement became increasingly erratic. The pilot understood a simple truth. Remaining predictable meant becoming vulnerable. So unpredictability became survival. Sharp directional changes followed one another rapidly. Low-altitude maneuvering intensified while the aircraft attempted to exploit sea surface conditions and tracking limitations. For several moments, pursuit quality became fragmented. Then the battlespace changed again. Along distant coastal sectors, electronic warfare systems suddenly activated. Signal environments shifted instantly. Transmission frequencies changed. Power outputs fluctuated. Across operational displays, new radar signatures appeared without warning. More contacts emerged, then more, and more. Within minutes, the battlespace became flooded with electronic noise. Simultaneously, drone routes activated across multiple sectors. Low-cost unmanned systems moved through the region along carefully designed flight paths. Their purpose was not direct attack. Their purpose was confusion. These drones intentionally created signatures resembling genuine targets. Several crossed civilian corridors. Others moved through commercial maritime traffic. Soon the operational environment transformed into something far more dangerous. Not because of missiles, not because of firepower, because of uncertainty. Ghost contacts spread across tactical displays. Some appeared briefly before disappearing. Others remained visible long enough to resemble legitimate threats. Several behaved realistically enough to force continuous monitoring. Operators faced an entirely new challenge. The pursuit no longer involved one aircraft. Now it involved dozens, maybe hundreds, and nobody knew which one mattered. Inside command networks, information density exploded. Tracking systems began processing enormous volumes of conflicting data. Multiple signatures occupied the same operational sectors, while radar returns continuously overlapped. For several minutes, the battlespace looked dangerously close to informational collapse. But instead of breaking under pressure, the network adapted. Systems changed behavior. Contacts stopped being analyzed independently. Instead, they were compared against each other. Movement stability, flight consistency, thermal correlation, trajectory reliability, probability assessments. Artificial signatures gradually began exposing themselves. Some lacked proper movement behavior. Others failed thermal consistency checks. Several displayed patterns no genuine aircraft should possess. Slowly, deception began weakening. One by one, false contacts lost credibility. Reality separated itself from illusion. Meanwhile, the retreating aircraft continued moving toward friendly territory, believing confusion had once again created opportunity. From inside the cockpit, survival probably felt close. The attack had succeeded. The strike had landed, and now escape appeared possible. But something fundamental had changed, because the mission was no longer simply a pursuit. Somewhere during the chaos, the entire battle transformed into something else. This was no longer aircraft versus aircraft. No longer speed against speed. No longer maneuver against maneuver. Instead, it had become a war between information systems, between deception and analysis, between uncertainty and understanding. Because modern battlefields no longer belonged only to the platform carrying weapons. They belonged to whoever understood reality faster. And while the aircraft continued racing toward safety, far above the battlefield, the network was still watching.